do a bit of an intro. Oh, they won't have my intro. A bit of an intro to myself. I think I know quite a few people here, but there's a lot of new names, which is a good thing. So, so I'm Richard. I'm probably like a lot of people on this call in the sense that I'm an independent consultant. I've had a relationship with Partners in Change for a couple of years, and in fact, most of my work comes through Partners in Change nowadays. But I have two other sort of strings to my bow. One is I tout a piece of software around, which is a project management simulation for training new project managers. And I'm also a professional writer. And the word professional just means sometimes I get paid for it. But obviously, as I'm still a consultant, so you can tell that I've not made my millions and living in the Bahamas or anything like that. But so I've been writing since 2004, and I've written, depending on how you count, either 13 or 18 books. And that's not deliberately mysterious. 5 of them are short ebooks, which I don't really count as books, but my publisher insists they are books and that I've written 18 books. I think it's 13. And if you look at that 13 books, 11 of them are professional books, which are probably the things we're interested in mostly. Now, when I write a book for me always starts from an observation. So a long time ago, back in about 2003 or 4, I started writing a book called The Project Manager, Mastering the Art of Delivery. And that started with the observation that there was no correlation, or I could see no correlation between how good the people I had working for me as project managers that time, and there was about 60 of them, how good they were and how much project management training they'd done. And I thought that was an interesting observation. And I spoke to a lot of project managers and they all said, oh yeah, we know the training's all shit, but we just have to do it because we want the badge. And I thought, oh, there's something interesting here. If it's not the training that's making them good, it must be something else. And so I went off and wrote a book, or I did some research and then wrote a book on what makes somebody good as a project manager. And it was about project managers rather than project management. And that sort of process has continued over the years. And most recently, I say late last year, it was actually back in April, I wrote a book called The Freelance Consultant. And it was really aimed at people who are kind of, I suspect, like most of the people on this call, independents. We may have relationships with a firm like Partners in Change, but we're independents and things like and that. And the genesis of the book was, I know lots of freelancers, I know lots of contractors, independent consultants, coaches, and so on. And in sort of internet speak, some of them nowadays are completely smashing it, i.e. they're hugely successful. But I also know quite a lot of people who are not really that successful at what they're doing. And yet, if I looked at their skill sets or how good they were as a consultant or as a coach, it wasn't immediately obvious to me why some of them were as so successful and some of them weren't. So again, I thought that's something quite interesting, and I'll have a look at that. And my normal writing process is something like this. I go and sit at my desk and think for a bit. I have a sort of internal Socratic dialogue where I challenge myself to think about things, but I try not to write books that are, this is the opinion of Richard Newton. I'd actually try and do some research, which means I go and read a lot, but then I go and talk to people. And in this case, that was really easy because, as I say, I know lots of contractors and consultants and people who have been doing this for a while. So I went out and talked to a whole load of people. And some of them had quite interesting stories. And so I decided that I would include their stories in the book. So there's a story about how they got into what they were doing, and their tips for other people doing this. And that's what I'm going to pull on tonight. And I suspect these are going to be quite different things from the things you may be expecting in some cases. And they're certainly different, come from a slightly different angle from the few that have come up on Slack on people's tips about being great consultants. And let me be clear, I kind of use the term fairly broadly independent. I struggled when I was writing the book with coming up with a nice term that covered independent consultants, contractors, freelancers, self-employed coaches, and all that great group of people who kind of sell a service based on some skill or knowledge to people. But that was what the book was about. So let me go into my bits of advice. But I will say the people I pulled these from were mostly consultants, but there were a couple of coaches, one very successful coach and one new starting. There were some IT contractors. There was one independent financial advisor, which was interesting as well, because I think they had a different look on it, but also a professional services giver, and one copywriter. And so let me talk about the top 10 tips from them. Now, I have to say there's no science to this. I've just gone through the book in the last couple of days and picked them, and I'm kind of slightly let's say I'm slightly disparaging about things like top 10 lists. It's all a little bit clickbaity, but Craig, as the marketing person, said, no, it has to be a top 10 or a top 7 or your best 3 tips. So it's gone for 10. But and looking at the audience, it's obviously worked in the clickbait fashion. So let me give you my top 10. So first one, I would say that the first tip I found, which was probably not what I was expecting, was if you're going to be great at this sort of work, know what it is you want from it. And there's a little bit of a kind of a background story to that. I mean, I think when I started out independently, which was about 20 years ago, if you looked across the pool of people I knew as independents, contractors, independent consultants, and the like, if I was honest, there was always the whiff, I might say, of the cowboy about them. And I don't mean that in the sense that they didn't do good work. I meant more in the sense that they came in off the range and looked a bit dirty, and they're the ones who walked up to the bar and would say, give me 2 fingers of rye. Or if you want a different analogy, when you were back at school, they were the ones who would be sitting on the back row, the big back row at the back of the bus, and they would know the songs to all the words to all the rude songs and something like that. And there was something about that sort of pool that was very different from the slightly more prissy people who had permanent jobs in big corporates and things like that. And they had a different culture. But if you asked them about success, I never did this 20 years ago, but this was my impression. Most people would have said day rate and number of days. It was a pretty simple number. How many days do I work a year and what's my day rate? And I'm smashing it, let's say, if I've got a big day rate and I've got a number of days. The most interesting thing I found about the people who I met successful now is they've spent a lot of time thinking about coming into sort of being a consultant or coach or whatever else, what it is they want from the career. And I think this has changed quite significantly. Now, if you're someone like me, at the end of your career, you've tend to got a bit more flexibility anyway. But I noticed, and I interviewed a lot of people at the start of their career, and there's still a big change in what people want from this sort of work in terms of flexibility, lifestyle. And I came across things I never expected to come across, like firms of people, of consultants I'd never heard of, who for 20 years, not just recently, have never sent anyone to client site. They have worked remotely permanently for 20 years. It's in their company. That's what they do. If you don't want remote work, don't come to us. That's all we do. And it's just an example, but I found that the first thing that drives success in people in our kind of field is being very, very clear what you want from it. And I know it's an obvious thing to say, but I think actually relatively few of us are. We will have all, in a Partners in Change world, been to a client site who says, this is my project, I need some help, but what do you think about it? And after about 3 minutes where they're saying, well, it kind of looks great, but we don't actually know what you're trying to achieve. So maybe we should just go back a few steps and you tell us what your goals are. And I think there is this thing in our field about being clear individually about what the goals are. What is it we're trying to get out of it? Is it day rate and days, or is it something else? And if you're not clear, you're not going to get it. So, and I found a number of people who were very, very clear, and they started their professional life by being clear exactly what it is they wanted out of it. So that was kind of my lesson 1. Lesson 2 was everybody I've met who's successful as a consultant has a niche. They have a niche. The sort of slight way of putting it is, a specialist make it, generalists don't. Now, there will be an exception to that rule, and everybody on this call will know somebody who's a generalist who's doing very, very well, probably. But I generally, this thing about being niche specialists, and if you want to know how far a niche can take you, I met some person who charges £1,000 an hour, which kind of, to me, which was so out of the ballpark in terms of fee rate. But I can assure you they were very much a niche specialist. They were actually a coach, but they were coached a very particular group of people. And obviously, if we're going to be a niche specialist, we need to have customers. They need to be accessible to us, and they need to have a propensity to pay for our service. And again, the difference between people who are really great is that they had chosen people who were in those fields. I did meet some people floating around who had some wonderful service lines, but until you pointed out, it sounds great, but I'm not sure there's anyone to pay for that. Or if there is anyone who wants it, they probably don't have any money. So having a niche, absolutely critical. Easy stuff so far. The third thing I found, what makes great people great, is when we think about niches, we often think about what we do as in the way we provide our professional services. I think the how we do it is at least as important as what we do. So there's this thing about people who are extremely good spend a lot of time thinking about how they do it as much as what they do. And, if you look at the people clients hire time and time again, they are not always the best expert. In fact, often they're not the person with the most expertise. They are the person who exhibits and executes that expertise in a way the client finds pleasant and enjoyable, or whatever else, or suits the situation. So thinking a lot about the how we do things. And if you're like me and years ago used to work for one of the big consultancies, I actually worked for an American outfit called A.T. Kearney, and I had some time with Ernst & Young. When you looked at the partners, the people who were quite successful, actually, they generally weren't the greatest experts. They were just generally people who were good at the how bit more than the what. So I think thinking about how you do it rather than just what you do. And I suspect, if you're like me, it's only from time to time that I really reflect on how I'm doing my work. And actually seeking feedback on how we do things, I think, is particularly important. The fourth one I'm going to pick on, and I think this is particularly pertinent to those of us who are independents, people working, say, in the network with people like Partners in Change, is the fact that the people I've found who were really good at what they did think a lot about their network. Now, in a modern era, when we hear about network, immediately minds jump to things like social media and do you have 1 million contacts on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that good stuff, or in our case, probably we think about LinkedIn. And that's actually not what I'm talking about. I mean, that's very nice, but that's not really what I'm talking about. Most of us don't need 1 million contacts. I mean, I suspect I'm not too dissimilar to most of you. In a busy year, I might have 8 clients. In a in a normal year, I might only have 1. So it's not like I need a network with 1 million people, but I do need a network that's sufficiently big for me. Because at the end of the day, all of us, more or less, are in the sales business. We have to make sales. We have to get customers on board. And I came across some interesting behavior, which I hadn't observed before, which is for some people on this call, there'll be a thought, well, I don't really sell. Actually, I have a relationship, for example, with Partners in Change, and they do the selling and I rock up and do the work. In which case, the argument from some of the people I've talked to was, well, then Partners in Change are your customer. And how often have you sat there and sat down and thought about it? What is it that helps Partners in Change to be successful? And what is it they want from a great consultant that will make them sell you time and time again, give you the work that you want, give you the rate that you want, and all the rest? And have you actually sat down and had that discussion about what it is that you do and how it aligns with their needs? And it was a very interesting thing, because I think traditionally, those who've been independents have kind of thought of the intermediary as a necessary evil rather than necessarily as our customer, who we should be treating as a customer and thinking about as a customer in that way. And I thought it was an interesting way of thinking, and I think very productive. The fifth lesson, the fifth thing I picked out from talking about people, again, I think for anybody who's been in professional service for a long time, pretty obvious, but I still think worth stressing. We live in a digital era. We live in an era where we talk about channels, and we're all virtualized now and all that good stuff. But fundamentally, people still do buy from people. In professional services, it's always about people and a personal relationship. And when you dig below that, there's a couple of things that come out. Well, there's 3, but I'm going to split one off into a separate point that came out time and time again. If we're thinking about people, what is it they're looking for when they're talking to somebody in professional services? And let's be one thing clear about, they're not looking for an employee. When we look for an employee, and most of us have had jobs at some point or other, proper jobs, I mean, and may have hired people, we look for something in an employee, and we're looking for potentially something specific that fits with our firm and our culture and long-term careers and all the rest. When I hire somebody from professional services, I'm looking for something completely different. I'm really looking predominantly for credibility. Do they have credibility in their field? And that might be quite a narrow field. Whereas an employee, I quite possibly don't want to be narrow. My professional services person, and this links into niche, I do want to be narrow. In fact, that gives them more credibility if they are narrow. The broader they are, the less likely I kind of see them as a good enough specialist for what I want. So there's this thing about having a degree of credibility. And the other side of people hiring people is one of the things that all the successful people came across is they're all quite friendly people, interestingly enough. People who work in independent work, or at least they can turn on the friendliness, at least, let me put it like that, whether it's sincere or not. And, you know, it's a simple truth. We all like people we like. Now, there's a challenge there in terms of the world where, you know, there are challenges with diversity. And if you look at our magnificent profile of largely middle-aged white men in PIC, you will know that we have this challenge as well. But so, you know, I don't want to displace that, but there is an issue about good professional services people are approachable and friendly to their clients and build those relationships. We actually like working with people we like. It doesn't sound terribly profound, but we probably don't think about it enough. So this people buy from people. But then number 6, lesson 6, if there is a magic source of all magic sources in our kind of work, it's about building trust. Clients want people they trust, and they will buy time and time again from people they trust. And that's fine. I mean, that's kind of a relatively easy comment to make. But if you talk to people and maybe you want to have that internal dialogue with yourself and talk about how you build trust with your clients, a lot of us sort of go, well, kind of, I build trust. Yeah, well, I'm just a trustworthy sort of person and clients like me and they trust me. And that's fine. But what I found with people who are really good is they go about this in a deliberate way, almost a calculated way, to build and develop trust. They think about the things that build and develop trust. So, and if you want some tips on that, there's a book, The Trusted Advisor, which it's an American book, which means the advice is quite good. The writing style is pretty painful, but actually it's fundamentally a good book. And if you want to build on that, go and have a look at that. And it's this ability to think about, what is it that builds trust with my client and what am I actively going to do? Now, some of us probably intuitively do this to a certain degree, but thinking about it explicitly, I think is critically important. And I cannot stress enough that trust is the secret source of all professional services. And the thing I always talk about is a lot of us would probably qualify ourselves or explain ourselves as a safe pair of hands, somebody who is reliably do a great job. And that's a great thing to be. But that is a very different thing from being somebody who is a real trusted advisor with a client. And if you want me to put that in practical terms, what's the difference, I think, between someone who is a safe pair of hands and a trusted advisor is safe pair of hands is called when I have a job to do and I need it done. A trusted advisor is someone I phone up to discuss something before I've really even formed my idea. And what does that mean in practical terms? Well, it leads to all sorts of opportunities, but if I can put it bluntly, the people I think were safe pair of hands were earning roughly half what the people who were trusted advisors were earning. And in some cases, the trusted advisors were earning more than twice as much. So thinking about this trust equation, because it's valuable to clients and it's useful to them, and being deliberate about it, I think is probably the biggest tip I can give of all. Nevertheless, I promised 10, so there are 4 more to go. Number 7, I found about the people who are really successful is they invest in their own personal development. I think a lot of us as consultants, we kind of learn on the job and we're doing new things and we find new stuff. The problem is skills really do age. I have 2 books, which between them sold almost 50,000 copies, the 2 books. Until about 5 years ago, they still were selling, but now they don't really sell at all. They're 2 books on project management. You know, project management may still be there, but actually it's not really sexy. It's not what clients think is, you know, the leading edge. They want, you know, agile coaches and all that sort of stuff. And even if you take an agile coach, I mean, I was probably hiring agile coaches first, you know, getting on 10 years ago, and then they were like hen's teeth and difficult to find. It's increasingly a commodity skill set in its own right. So there is this thing about, we need to, if you want to be, if I can make it very material, if you want to be earning decent money, you need to keep your skills going on. And of course, you'll do that if someone's on your job. But I found the people who were particularly successful were deliberately investing in their own skills development. I went one guy who said, and this one slightly blew my mind, he said, I spend the equivalent, and it was so precise, the equivalent of 2 days professional fees on professional books every year, and that keeps my skills up. That's part of what I do to keep my skills up to date. So investing in professional skills, important. This really aimed at those of us who are independent, being realistic about the ups and downs in the market. You know, there's a certain amount of saving a rainy day, but us independents, there has been this history. You know, you've got a contract, you've signed up with PIC, they've got you on a great gig, you've got 8 months to go, you're walking on air, you are the king of the world, there's a money's rolling in, and then suddenly you have a 2 or 3 month downtime, and oh my god, I'm useless and everybody's forgotten me, and my skills are out of date. And I think it's just having that realistic view that, you know, it does go up and down, it does flow around. And I found that the people who were good at this were generally pretty relaxed about the times they were in and out of work. That was just the way it goes, and they had prepared themselves financially and all the rest for those things. So prepare that. And number 9, and this one I found particularly useful because it's one I'm guilty of, was relax about your own weaknesses. Now, certainly when I became a consultant to begin with, and back in a long time ago in a big consultancy firm, I think I thought I had to be great at everything. Yeah. And I think people who are really good realize, no, I'm good at a certain specific thing, and that's what I do. And if a client wants something else, they need somebody else, or I need to partner with somebody else. And people relax about the areas they're not strong on, and really keep focused on those things that they're really very good at. And you know, I think that was a sound piece of advice that I found there. So, you know, there's no problem saying to clients, you know what, that's not what I do, or that's not my skill set, my skill's somewhere else, and just being completely relaxed about that, it actually is a positive thing. And the final lesson, and again, this really aimed at those who are kind of independents, was somebody picked up with me, which was don't do it yourself. By which I mean, we tend to live in a market where we sell professional services. We're actually pretty bad about buying professional services ourselves. We tend to think we can kind of bodge everything together ourselves and we can do everything. We probably have an accountant because we have to have an accountant, but anything else we don't do. And again, I found that the people I would regard as really good and really successful consultants actually are pretty relaxed about hiring other people to give them advice and do other things with them, whether that's, you know, the mundane of building a website through to more, you know, longer term things like having coaches and stuff like that. So there you go, 10 lessons. Are these really the most important lessons? Well, I'll leave you that to decide. And but those are the 10 I chose to give you for today. There's tons more in the book. I was told not to plug too hard, but I'll plug a little bit. It's brilliant, and there's a lot more in it.
Fantastic.
Back to you, Craig.
Brilliant. That's really interesting, Richard. Thank you for that. We've got 5 minutes or so. Anybody in the audience with a question? If you put your hand up.
Unless you're off camera.
Or an alternative opinion. Very happy to hear alternative opinions as well. Martin.
Hi, question for me. My first opening thought was, how do you define success? And I think, Craig, Richard, you've talked a lot about success on a monetary basis in terms of, you know, are you bringing in the fees? Are you comfortable? Have you considered broader criteria for success and consultants that feel successful but maybe are not in it for the money?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. In fact, I mean, I possibly didn't stress it enough then. My first point was about sitting there and working out what success means to you. As I say, I think 20, 30 years ago, it was pretty much taken for granted that money was it. I think that is going fast. And certainly there were lots of people I met, and without being ageist, lots of younger people I met who were very clear that, yes, there was a certain monetary threshold they had to cross, but that was very much a secondary issue in the career. And the career was either about doing work they liked or about lifestyle balance with it, and ideally both. And, you know, people who are completely adamant about things like, all my work is location independent and I'm based in a different country. Location was probably the biggest, but also the second one was lifestyle, often, but not always, related to family things and having the flexibility to do that. Yeah. So I think success is there, and some of the most successful people I've met were people who the judgment of success was their judgment of success, not your classic I'm billing N tens of thousands a year. And I think it's a healthy thing. Yeah.
Thanks, Richard. Nancy, you've got your hand up. You're on mute.
Yeah, coming off mute. Just a couple of observations around the network thing, Richard. I was IT consultant for independent for most of my career, and to me the best thing I did was build relationships with agents. I considered them double glazing salesmen at times, but they were the people that got me the work, and I went 10 years moving from contract to contract. So to me that was a good investment of time. But the other thing is networks age. It's not,
yeah, it's a good
work
point.
your network, build a good network, sit back, relax. It's the people change. When you get to our age, the people start retiring. So managing the network is a continuous and ongoing task.
I think that's a really good point, Nancy. I think both of them are good, but the latter one, certainly in my age range, the more and more people I've got on LinkedIn with their job title as retired, and they're still good people, but I need, if it's professionally work related, I need to find new people. Yeah.
Mark Small, you got your hand up?
Yeah, hi Richard. From me, I guess, in terms of the people you were speaking to, was there a sense around adaptability of style as being quite an important dynamic, or was that sort of absorbed into your trust and people buy from people piece?
I think for me it is absorbed into that a little bit. I think I would put them into two groups, if you like, and there were people who really were experts in the sense that they sell themselves as a point expert in a very specific niche. And I think for them, there was less of an issue with adaptability and more just came down to credibility. They were known as the expert in that field. They are a very small group, to be honest, and but I think for everybody else, yes, adaptability. At the end of the day, we do have some choice over our clients. And I often stress to people, you know, if you don't like your clients, then find some new ones, because you know you've only got one life. But fundamentally, we have to have a degree of adaptability. I think that's both in terms of style. I think it is, although I think there are people who are living a much more flexible lifestyle than if you'd asked me 10, 15 years ago was possible doing this sort of work. There are people who are successfully doing it. Even they say there's a degree of flexibility about, I would like 3 months off in the summer, but the reality is I will get 3 months off at some point, but there's a degree of leeway in it in terms of when clients are around and available. So flexibility both in style, but also, or adaptability both in terms of style, but also reasonable expectations. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Richard. Steve Hornsby, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks, Richard. I thought that was a great list, and really interesting that you've based it on research and talking to the people. In terms of the building trust and your comment about deliberate, calculated, proactive way, that was particularly interesting. Just say a bit more about that.
Yeah. Okay. So and I'll be completely clear here. I've stolen, well, not stolen, because I've given all the credit. I've largely taken my approach for trust building from the book, The Trust Advisor. I think it's got there, and it's got a little, if you like, a little equation. It's a little bit noddy, but I think it's still quite useful. And they talk about things like building your credibility, building your reliability, being seen not to be showing too much self-interest. They have a 4-point equation. I've forgotten what the fourth one is off the top of my head, but you can start to do those things. Now, you know, to some extent, I think when you see it, we all do it naturally, more or less, but I don't think we often reflect on it and sort of go, okay, I don't seem to be building the trust here. Why not? What is it that is it my credibility? Is it my reliability? Am I showing what they call too much self-interest? Are you not being seen to put the client's interest in front of me? So it's that sort of active analysis, I think, that's the important piece.
One observation I'd have though, Richard, is I often saw in my relationships with clients, it's when you're sharing personal insights, actually, not necessarily about the work. And
Yeah.
I suppose it's showing a level of vulnerability together, actually.
You have given me the fourth point on their equation, which is self-disclosure. So it's that thing about having a bit of a personal relationship. And the thing about self-disclosure is the point about opening up to things which are not directly related to necessarily the work at hand. Again, we tend to naturally do this. I think the important thing is, if you want to build trust, you have to go first. Yeah,
we had very briefly in PwC sales days, one of the core aspects of the sales training was building trust, and the exercise was about demonstrating vulnerability. And the key message was, if it didn't feel vulnerable to tell the other person, it wasn't right. But if you did it, the other person would pick up on it, and it was very effective at building direct personal trust.
And Mike, I'd agree with you on that, because I think, and by the way, my name is not Johnson Baby Shampoo, it's Deepak Mahal, but I think the whole thing about being a bit vulnerable, or just giving a bit of yourself, I think is a great tool, but some people don't like it. So you almost got to pick up on that. Some people are quite, introverts and get very uncomfortable when you start talking about your family and what do you do. So you just got almost, on the whole, I think it works great, Richard, because I think the whole thing about people like people, that's beyond just what they see as your skills. It's what you stand for, what you do, and there's often a linkage that they have a common. If you put a common based upon what you've shared, that helps so much. Be it a love of Land Rovers or countryside, or you have dogs. All that just adds to that relationship. But you're right, Mike. You just got to be careful about, if they're a bit introvert, they don't like it, and you almost got to pull back.
Yeah, there are definitely cultural and individual levels on it, but I think the basic point is absolutely valid. I mean, and Deepak, here you are proudly calling yourself Johnson Baby Shampoo. That shows a degree of open vulnerability to the group. We trust you implicitly now.
No more tears.
Yeah, no more tears.
Excellent. Well, we've run over time a little. Any final questions from anyone?
I'll just say comment is as good as a question as well. If anybody wants to, has got something on the tip of their tongue saying, I must say this, please do.
Can we get mate rates on your book?
No, sorry about that. It's all with publishers. I would if I could. I'm afraid I can't.
I'm sure you would.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Thanks for turning out tonight. And Richard, thanks for a really interesting half hour. The book is available from all good booksellers, particularly Amazon. And it's a really good read. I saw one early on and I really enjoyed it. So thanks for joining everyone. Thank you, and we'll see you all in a month.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks a lot,
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Thanks,